Most people believe Judaism is built on a single, unified tradition. But what if one Jewish community quietly rejected thousands of years of rabbinic authority, rewrote how Scripture is interpreted, and still survives today, spread across several countries, practicing a form of Judaism that many Jews themselves have never encountered? This is the world of the Karaites. The Karaites represent one of the most radical theological departures within Jewish history, not by abandoning the Torah, but by insisting on following it more literally than almost anyone else. Their beliefs challenge assumptions about law, tradition, authority, and even how God intended Scripture to be understood. To understand why Karaites remain both fascinating and controversial, we must begin with what truly sets them apart. At the heart of Karaite belief is a single, uncompromising principle: the Torah alone is binding. Karaites reject the oral law entirely, the Mishnah, the Talmud, and centuries of rabbinic interpretation that form the foundation of Rabbinic Judaism. According to Karaite theology, God gave Moses the written Torah and nothing else. Any later traditions, interpretations, or legal expansions are viewed as human creations rather than divine revelation. This belief is grounded in verses such as Deuteronomy 4:2, which warns not to add to or subtract from the law. This rejection has enormous consequences. In Rabbinic Judaism, religious life depends on inherited interpretation, laws explained, expanded, and adapted by scholars over time. Karaites reject this model. Instead, every believer is expected to read, analyze, and interpret Scripture personally, using reason, language, and context. This idea is often summarized by a classical Karaite principle: search well in the Torah and do not rely on my opinion. The result is a form of Judaism that is intensely individual, yet deeply textual. One of the most surprising differences appears in how Karaites observe the Sabbath. Rabbinic Judaism permits many activities on Shabbat based on Talmudic interpretation, including keeping lights on that were lit before sunset. Karaites read Exodus 35:3 literally, "Ye shall not kindle fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day." Historically, this meant no fire, no light, and no heat from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. In earlier centuries, Karaite homes sat in darkness on the Sabbath, a practice documented by medieval Jewish and Muslim scholars alike. Even today, many Karaites avoid electricity entirely on Shabbat, not because of rabbinic rulings, but because they interpret electricity as a modern form of fire. Another major divergence concerns calendar calculation. Rabbinic Judaism uses a fixed mathematical calendar established in late antiquity. Karaites reject this system. Instead, they rely on actual lunar observation and the state of barley crops in Israel to determine the beginning of months and festivals. The month of Passover, according to Karaite interpretation of Exodus 12 and Leviticus 23, must occur when barley reaches a specific stage of ripeness known as a viv. If the barley is not ready, the year is extended. This agricultural method ties religious observance directly to the land of Israel and natural cycles, reflecting what Karaites argue is the Torah's original intent. Dietary laws also reveal striking differences. While Karaites follow the biblical prohibitions on forbidden animals, they reject rabbinic additions such as separating meat and dairy. Since the Torah never explicitly bans consuming milk and meat together, only instructing not to boil a kid in its mother's milk, Karaites read the command narrowly. As a result, Karaite kitchens do not maintain separate meat and dairy utensils, a fact confirmed by ethnographic and historical records from Egypt, Crimea, and the modern state of Israel. Prayer practices further emphasize textual purity. Karaite prayer consists almost entirely of direct biblical quotations, primarily from Psalms. There are no standardized rabbinic prayers, no Amidah in its traditional form, and no Talmudic blessings. During prayer, Karaites traditionally prostrate fully, lying face down on the ground, an ancient posture of worship preserved from biblical times, but long abandoned by Rabbinic Judaism. This physical humility remains one of the most visually striking Karaite practices. Even theological authority is decentralized. Karaites historically recognized scholars, but not rabbis in the rabbinic sense. No individual or court holds the power to permanently define law for all believers. Interpretation evolves through study, debate, and linguistic analysis, often drawing on Hebrew grammar, context, and comparative Semitic languages. This approach produced a rich medieval Karaite scholarly tradition, particularly between the 9th and 12th centuries. Figures such as Anan ben David, Daniel al-Kumisi, and Japheth ben Eli produced extensive biblical commentaries, many preserved in the Cairo Geniza and referenced in modern academic research. Muslim historians of the Abbasid period also documented Karaite communities, noting their distinct legal views and intellectual independence. Despite theological marginalization, Karaites survived. Today, modern Karaite populations are small but active. Estimates vary, but scholars generally place the global Karaite population between 30,000 and 50,000 individuals. The largest community lives in Israel, where most Karaites immigrated during the 20th century from Egypt and Eastern Europe. Israeli Karaites maintain synagogues, religious courts, and educational institutions, particularly in cities such as Ashdod, Ramla, and Beersheba. Another historically significant group resides in Eastern Europe, especially Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine. The Crimean Karaites developed a unique Turkic language and cultural identity, and in some cases were legally classified separately from Rabbinic Jews during the Russian Empire. Smaller Karaite communities exist in the United States, particularly in California, as well as in Turkey, where the ancient Karaite synagogue in Istanbul still functions. Unlike many Jewish denominations, Karaites do not actively seek converts, and lineage traditionally follows the father rather than the mother, another departure from rabbinic norms. In the modern era, Karaites face complex challenges, preserving ancient traditions, navigating Israeli religious law, and explaining their identity in a world where Judaism is often assumed to be monolithic. Yet their survival itself is remarkable. For over 1,000 years, Karaites have insisted that Scripture alone is sufficient, that divine law requires no intermediaries, and that faith demands personal responsibility rather than inherited authority. Whether viewed as biblical purists, religious dissenters, or guardians of an alternative Jewish path, the Karaites remind us that history is rarely as uniform as tradition suggests. Their existence raises a quiet but profound question. If Scripture speaks for itself, who truly has the authority to interpret it?
Thanks for watching.